Larissa Hall. This is Esteban Lopez.
Hi.
We are debating internet censorship today, um, particularly related to the workplace and employment. So just as a brief introduction, I want to talk a little bit about what internet censorship is. So internet censorship is basically the control or suppression of information that can be accessed, published, or viewed on the internet. And this can be carried out by governments or any private organizations on behalf of governments, regulators, or even on their own initiative, so companies. Um, some areas of censorship include copyrights, defamation, harassment, and obscene material. And an interesting little tidbit fact that I came across that I thought would be good starting point for our debate is that people really have opposing preferences on censorship. There was a 2012 Internet Society survey where 71% of respondents agreed that censorship should exist in some form on the internet. But in that same survey, 83% of people agreed that access to the internet should be considered a basic human right, and 86% also agreed that the freedom of expression should be guaranteed on the internet. So I thought that was interesting, really opposing views, people saying, yes, we want censorship, but freedom of speech is very important to us. So I think overall, and in my stance that I'm going to take here, is people don't really know what they want, and
Well,
they
I think we should narrow it down because my focus was actually in the workplace, and
sure,
that's
sure,
that's
we're gonna,
that's where
yeah,
I'm gonna take my stance. So,
sure,
if I may, maybe
yeah,
probably the first thing that I noticed was it morale. Blocking websites completely at companies is just going to affect employee morale and productivity. Whereas I found, as you said, a lot of information that it might hinder productivity, but what ends up happening is like it just breeds contempt, for the higher ups, and then this sort of contempt breeds disloyalty, and this loyalty kind of slowly deteriorates the company from the inside out.
okay. So in terms of morale and productivity, um, how are you seeing employees successfully using the internet at work?
I'm glad
I
you
mean,
asked that. Here are some points. Communication. I mean, really, the key to business is success is like communication, internal and external. And probably one of the fastest means of like communication today is social networking. Employees may be communicating with the outside world, but many of those people are consumers and possible clients. Another thing is I noticed that it was really important was when employees get stuck in an idea, they can actually call on their followers on Twitter and Facebook and get like a deluge of answers, like free and fast, so that in turn kind of helps productivity.
okay. And did you have another point? Did you
So
have
I
three
have, I have
points or?
several.
Oh, okay.
um,
So I like that you said brainstorming. Now I wanted to make a distinction because I looked at censorship in the workplace, and I didn't necessarily think it related to censoring absolutely everything. I felt that censorship in the workplace is really relegated to the industry that businesses are in, say a financial or a security industry, might need more censorship, whereas a creative, a marketing industry would not need those things. So like you say, yes, go to Twitter for brainstorming, reach out to your network for for ideas and creative results.
yeah, but I
But
think
I
that's a problem now. That I mean, some companies are taking, I mean, the whole blanket effect saying, okay, social media, we got to cut that, and that's where I guess the employee morale is hurt. As I just mentioned, my points are basically saying, hey, social media is necessary for businesses nowadays.
so you refer to social media, but I think that I mean it's important to note that we already are living with a lot of censorship. I mean companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, YouTube, all of these social networks that we use, as soon as you join them, you're already complying to their services. And through very gray language, they're saying, vaguely, at our discretion, we can decide what we choose to distribute via our web resources. So I think we're already living with that censorship. So at work, it's basically an extension of that. We're really being guided by what the employer wants us to do in terms of protecting their liability, giving us the ability to be good netizens and treat each other appropriately and use work resources appropriately and with proper stewardship. But overall, I mean, I think this is just an extension of the fact that we live in such a data-filled world that there's got to be some controls in place in what's shared, how it's shared, and especially in the workplace.
Honestly, doing my research, the things that kept popping up was that, hey, most employees already know how to bypass block sites with programs like bit.ly, and they do this by just entering the site's IP address or using a tiny URL, which makes it difficult to understand the real content. Additionally, if the content is like not safe for work, employees use like it's kind of an unraveler to give them a longer IP address, so that they're making sure that they're not going into a sort of a bad website. That's, as you said, that's going to hurt the company.
But this gives the impression that employees know that they're doing something wrong.
Or, I mean,
is that the case?
I can liken it to like China. Say, okay, is Facebook wrong in China? But it's social media, but it's been cut out, right? And they know how to bypass that. They want to have a Facebook account, and so they bypass that. I mean, so the same could be said for being at work. Hey, I want to access my social media. They can bypass that with this program. So I guess my question is really, what is censorship? Who decides what censorship is?
So I think that in the corporate responsibility, in terms of corporate social responsibility, that there are responsibilities that corporations have to their stakeholders. And what's important with that is that they've got all these other policies in place, that the extension of that as a censorship policy for websites at work should really focus on keeping employees working actively, having good job performance, and really keeping focused on the job at hand. So I wouldn't say that necessarily, why, what is censorship, and what it's more specifically defined again to the industry. And there's a lot of benefits to monitoring it. And there's a lot of benefits to making sure that it is censored, from, data theft deterrence and protection, to other IP protection. There's a lot of liability that businesses have that the employee, as an extension of the business, is directly responsible for maintaining that liability, regardless of the level that they work on.
So you're saying that as long as it's understood at the get-go from the beginning, I mean, what the parameters are as far as like employees, it's fine, the censorship?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because if you're already being censored on tools like Facebook, if they're already writing these very vague generalizations on what you agree to when you sign up to use these resources, then, that's basically an extension of how we should all have an expectation of using these tools everywhere. We'll focus on work right now because, there are specific liability concerns, but I just think it's what goes along with protecting ourselves and protecting businesses from all of the good, the bad, the ugly that can go on the internet.
So I guess this would follow the acronym of NSFW, not safe for work.
Exactly, yeah. So definitely not something safe for work. And there's other bigger government agencies that are trying to establish, and this is why we're having this debate, is because it's such a gray area. Like the FTC came up with a safeguard rule for establishing standards for administrative, technical, and physical safety for customer records at work. So with that, and we need to maintain not only the fact that we have to make good judgment at work, perform the task at hand, but there's so much information that's available within the networks, both privately and publicly at a workplace, that we run the risk of making other people's information available to, say, hackers or anyone who wants to bring harm to the company. So I think the internal and external threats really outweigh the fact that there's any reasonable expectation of privacy at work, and that employees really don't have a right, but businesses legally have a right to protect their business, basically.
With that said, as I said earlier, it all kind of boils down to the employees, because there's always going to be a workaround. As I mentioned earlier, as far as like the websites that, I mean, people, I had this huge Google search with like the 10 first hits were all about how to unblock.
I saw that.
Yeah, blocked sites at work. So in the end, even if there are safeguards, it's really just going to boil down to the employee themselves, and they're always going to find workarounds. You know, as I mentioned earlier too, you know, in China, they found a workaround, you know, to get to their Facebook page, to get to a Twitter page. So it's a form of censorship, and with that, people are always going to find a way to, you know, break through censorship or work around censorship, because it is sort of a basic human right.
Did you I don't know if you're familiar with that story that was at Harvard. I know this is not work related, but it's related to an institution. There was a student who basically sent in a bomb threat, but he was on the Harvard network, so they were able to see that he actually sent it internally, and he had logged in with his own credentials. So stupid.
Wow.
But I mean, cases like that, I can see a sense for monitoring, for censorship, for, you know, keeping, you know, certain information private and certain information public. But for when you have an idiot like this, I think really proves that whether, you know, you're a big part of the organization, a little part of the organization, but if you're an employee or a student.
Yeah, but it sort of goes back to my first point, where it's like, you know, basically it's all about morale. You know, if you here's another point. I'm sorry. More and more employees are like expected to take work home with them. In that case, if their laptop is still, you know, censored, or is there still censorship? I mean, what would you say to that?
It really depends. I mean, I know personally in my case, at work, I, you know, have to be on the network at work in order to get internet.
Right.
When I'm at home, and if I need to access specific applications within the network, I have to sign in virtually to the private network to use it. But other than that, I can, if I'm not signed into that, I can look at whatever I want.
I mean, but so many problems can arise because you've taken a computer home, you've logged on, you know, privately. Maybe you did something, and you take that computer back to work, and all the information is there, all the data. You know, let's say you went I don't know, to a Twitter site or a Facebook site, da da da. That not create problems?
Well, I think there's the issue of responsibility. I think that stewardship is very important when it comes to being an employee. You need to know how you're using company resources and how you're using them wisely. I think the responsibility is on you. So if you go home, use the computer for work, and look at something inappropriate, bring it back, and that registers on the network once you get back to work, then that's your fault. You messed up, and it's really up to your supervisor or the employee to decide what the next step is with that.